conditions. The next environment that's important to consider then is the environment of the family. By family, we don't just mean a mother and father and children, or we don't just mean an extended family. Across the world, a family can mean those kind of things, but it can also mean a group of AIDS orphans who are living with one village grandmother in one location together. So a family is that group that you eat your morning and evening meal with, if you have them, and those that you sleep under the same roof in overnight. And because they spend the most time with you, they matter the most. Moreover, the socioeconomic conditions under which the family lives has a huge influence on determining what your chances, and also the ability of the family to bring resources to bear to buffer the stresses of daily life in the outside environment matter a great deal for your development as a young child. Next out from there is the residential area, that is to say, the people who are living near you. What we would want is for residential neighborhoods to be safe, for them to be cohesive in that the adult community works well together, and for them to give priority to children. But in many parts of the world, the environments are dangerous. There is no cohesion between the adults, and there is no priority given to young children. And those differences make a huge difference, regardless of how hard families try. And so community development is a very, very important part of the equation in terms of early childhood because of the way in which the family environments and the residential environments interact together to create opportunities and risks for children. The fourth environment that I'm going to speak about is non-geographic. This is an environment that, in a sense, you carry around in your mind. That is to say, the relational community. So by the relational community, we mean is the community of people who may be living near you but may be living distant, from whom you get your identity. So it could be a religious group. It could be an ethnic group. It could be a national group. For that matter, it could be based on the occupation that your parents have, one way or another. But it tends to be a group that has clear ideas about gender relationships, clear ideas about what a successful life should be lived like, clear ideas about how parenting should be done, and very important as well, that its status within society might make you an in-group or might make you an out-group and therefore subject to discrimination, which, if it occurs early on in life, when basic brain development is occurring, can have profound lifelong effects. So the relational community, even though it isn't a geographic community, is very, very important to consider. The next community that we've identified is also non-geographic. It's the environments of services and programs. Now we, as people working in international development, we mostly think about the role we play in terms of creating programs and services to support children. But what we must understand is that those programs and services exist within a broader environment of social determinants of children's development. They don't exist in isolation. So on the one hand, we must take into account the social determinants in order to structure programs and services that can work for given groups. And on the other hand, the objectives of the programs and services we create is got to be partly to transform those environments so that they can support children's development better. If we plan and implement programs and services in isolation from thinking about the social determinants of health and child development, our chances of doing so successfully are very, very small. The next environment that we talk about, which is a geographic environment, is the region. And a region could be a metropolitan area, a political division like a state or province within a country, or a region defined by geography or common history. And here, the important thing in the developing country context is to understand that even in states which are failed states or states that are in a state of warfare or do not, as a broad national community, make a priority of early childhood, that within certain regional areas it is possible to do things to really, really improve the state of early child development. And we see that, for instance, in regions in northern Pakistan, around Gilgit, for instance, where the work of the Aga Khan Development Network has transformed the prospects for early child development. And we've seen it in relation to many of the community experiments that have gone on in places like Mexico, where in local communities, family strengthening programs have been taken on that have transformed the opportunities for early childhood in those areas. And so the region, and operating at a regional level to strengthen the opportunities for children's development is possible even in failed states and in situations of warfare. Which of course then brings us to the national community. And the importance there is to understand that there are successful and failed countries in relation to early child development at all levels of economic development across society. So I can show you among the family of the 30 wealthiest countries, societies that are investing 1 to 2% of their gross domestic product in early child development and are getting fabulous results. And I can show you other societies investing 1/4 to 0.5% of their gross domestic product and are getting very poor results. And the same is true in the developing world. And you don't have to look any further than Cuba, which is the second poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, that invests at that 1 to 2% level the same way that the Scandinavian countries do. And the results that they are getting in terms of early child development in Cuba are very competitive with countries like Sweden and the other Nordic countries. And we need to keep that idea in mind, that priority and policy can overcome the level of income of a country in terms of producing positive results in early child development. So in the end of the day, this model has multiple layers, and you as people who advise on policy and programs and deliver programs and services in regions need to be thinking then about how each of these levels, each of these environments interacts together to collectively determine early child development and the life chances of the child. And in your programs, if you think about this and think about what takes place at these different levels, it will make a big difference. And that leads me then to the final environment to consider, which is the global environment. And here there is both an opportunity and a constraint. On the constraint side, we have the globalization of the economy that in some ways is bringing increased prosperity to many societies. But the other thing that it is doing is bringing work-life, home-life conflict to traditional communities in a way it never existed before. So whereas it is true that in wealthy societies we struggle to find quality childcare for our children when we go out to work, in developing countries, people who are working long, long hours no longer, in most cases, have extended families to fall back on. Nowhere in the world are more than 25% of families equipped with extended family to help them. And for the rest of them then, children are quite often swaddled and tied into their cribs. 2-year-olds are left at home in the care of 4-year-olds, or children are actually brought to the workplace and tied to workstations in unhealthy workplaces. And so there is a huge constraint as a result of globalization of the economy. On the other hand, we have the globalization of human rights, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and all of the agencies that work together to support national efforts to improve early child development. And so we have both the constraint and also the opportunity that a globalized world creates. And that too then, when we think about how to use those opportunities, we need to think across all these levels of aggregation in society that we've talked about in this model. So the then question comes, what happens if children do not have equal access to nurturance at each of these different levels, from the individual right through to the global environment? And there's a very simple answer to that. And the answer is that we get inequitable outcomes in terms of child development, what we call a social gradient in early child development. And this little graphic here shows the key domains of early development that matter early on and matter across the life course. So it represents physical health and well-being, which matters early and across the life course. Communication skills, whether you understand and can make yourself understood. Language and cognitive development, your thinking and reasoning skills, and so forth. Emotional maturity, your ability to negotiate in difficult situations, your empathy, your helpfulness, etc., etc. Social competence, your ability to concentrate on tasks, work effectively in groups as opposed to being disruptive in one way or another. And all of these things are affected by the early years.